What is up, YouTube? We are back with Team Troponin, episodes 28. Friendly reminder, if you're enjoying these podcasts, you can check out teamtroponin.com for more information. Drop us a comment, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and remember that you can go to firstattachmentnutrition.com for any and all supplements formulated by this guy. Actually, not this guy. This guy. It's Marek. God, I can't figure this out. We have another really exciting kind of Justin association. Is that now through Justin, he has a sponsorship through Marek Health. Justin, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I'm excited about this because, we always talk about blood work and health and, where do you point people? And, because people want to just get lab work. They don't want to see a doctor, drive somewhere. And so if you go to my website, troponinnutrition.com, there's a blood work and lab panels, blood panels and lab works page. You go there, it'll go to Marek Health's site where you can go, or you can go to marekhealth.com/troponin. And then you can enter troponin for anything at Marek Health and get an additional 10% off. But you can see the exact panels that I recommend. So I have two different versions there, like just a quick update check panel and then like a full health panel. And so then I went through and I actually met, because I went through and I was like, well, this, because they say, what, if you could give your clients everything, what would you give? And so that's like the full one. And I'm like, right. So I want to know like all the stuff I wanted to know. And that's what I got my results today. I met with my patient care provider. It was really interesting, really cool. Because you could see, because you do the little things, because I always recommend A1C, and a lot of places don't do that automatically. That's in both panels automatically. And then the little things like, because creatinine is always going to be elevated if you carry a lot of muscle mass. EGFR is an estimated glomerular filtration rate, which becomes more inaccurate the more muscle mass you carry. And those are the big things you have to worry about as a bodybuilder, is kidney values. And so and those are the ones that the traditional methods are least accurate on. And so there's lots of different methods they can use, like cysteine, and so they track like the full everything. And so it was interesting to see the different ways that estimated my glomerular filtration rate, because I know what my true rate is. The last time I did, which is several years ago now, you can do a 24-hour clearance test. With, I don't know if Marek will have, I'm sure they have that option, but you'd have to work with a local lab. But that actually, you pee in a jug for 24 hours and they measure the creatinine that you're actually clearing out and then get a glomerular filtration rate from that. Mine was 135 the last time I did that, which is interesting because mine is like half that, less than half that by, it's a little more than half that by if they use the cysteine. It's a little less than a little less than half, I guess, if you do the traditional estimated glomerular filtration rate, non-African American.
So do you feel like the way that they have their labs set up are actually more catered towards, compared to another like HRT clinic, which is more designed for people going through an aging process, we'll say, do you feel like the way the Marek has their labs set up and their processes is more applicable to this particular population of better bodybuilding athletes?
Yeah, and that's even what the care provider I talked to says. They're not a TRT clinic. They're a full clinic. They offer everything. Peptides, metformin, and they treat, and they'll do, if your cholesterol's out of whack. They're not just there to TRT or anti-aging, or they're really trying to be like a full wellness health.
Almost sounds like interdisciplinary in a way.
Yeah. They want to cover everything. And then of course, in this case, it's, this is really, obviously my panels are going to be slightly more geared towards people in the sport because they're meant for my clients, technically. So it's but my full panel really covers pretty much everything, but they do, like the protein A and B, if you're with your lipoprotein and they'll track your small density lipoprotein, small low density lipoprotein. So like the lipoproteins will go through the blood, your body, because your blood's like water and, lipids are fat, like oil and water don't mix. Mm-hmm. And so that, And so like your body has to find a way to kind of like encapsulate or bind, and so that's what it does. And then slowly as it passes through, like that'll, shrink as that fat gets used, so the amount of small low density lipoprotein you have is an indicator that those lipids have been in the blood long enough. They're they're there a long time. They don't just get used right away, and so you don't want that number to be really high. But no one really checks that, and so that's something that's important to know, because if your cholesterol might be decent, but if you have a really high count for small density the small low density lipoprotein, that means when you're in prep, you're gonna struggle because you're not utilizing that fat in a timely manner. So it's interesting stuff that you don't normally get.
And it's interesting too. I mean, you even think about just the modern medical system and how everything is so boxed in. And I think we've talked about this before, where really when people start to exist on a continuum rather than within these nice, neat little boxes, there's so much carryover and overlap between different systems. And it kind of sounds like the blood work that you've selected through Marek actually looks at how those systems are related rather than just kind of,
and they even what's your sport, they want it, they look at it from the your ideal testosterone range is going to be different if you're trying to be a competitive bodybuilder. They know what you're doing, they know and they know if you're retired, they know you're not looking to be a 600 level, you're trying to be at the upper limit of the normal range. That's the same thing with their IGF-1, their same thing with and they had measures for tracking insulin sensitivity that I hadn't really, because you think A1C is the gold standard, and there were ones that I can't even speak on because I don't have knowledge of them really beyond my list of things I want to learn about, or my study guide for all their things they have as options. So I can
that's pretty impressive. I think anything that leaves you where you've been around as long as you have and learned as much as you have, and you're so in depth on everything, if there's a group that can bring things to you and leaves you kind of thinking, wow, I need to read up on this, I feel like that says a lot about the quality of what they offer.
Well, yeah, the small low density lipoprotein. I mean, I'm trying to think if I knew that existed. I mean, that makes sense. You have a big chunk of fat in the body, and as you utilize that fat, it's going to shrink. But I don't think I knew that was a testable metric, But if you have, and because they can, it's not just the density or percent, they can actually do a count, and so if you have a lot of that, that means you're not burning fat very well, And so if I have a client and we get blood work before they start prep, and maybe their cholesterol is good, their insulin sensitivity is good, but their small low density lipoprotein count sky high, we're gonna be like, we would have walked into prep and been trying to figure out why we're not burning fat like we needed to, why things aren't happening, and had no idea, because the traditional blood panel is not going to show that. We're going to be okay, technically your insulin sensitivity is where we want it, but we're not utilizing the fats in our bloods as fast as we want. Those fats, they're sitting around long enough that a lot of them sit around and stay small. They don't, by the time they're small, they should get burned up real quick. So we can present things differently. We would use something like metformin, or we would take a different approach with carbs or fat percentages in the diet, especially early on. So yeah, it's really interesting stuff. I mean, that's probably people wonder where bodybuilding is going to go, because it's hard to progress. People even say now that the end of the late 90s was the peak. And it's new compounds come out, peptides come out, but are they really improving the sport? I think it's going to be things like this, because when you really know those things, you can really fine tune the diet and then the peaking process and stuff.
Well, we've talked a little bit about how thermodynamics, how much of prep is just thermodynamics, and we've talked a lot about how some coaches want to talk a lot about how fancy their systems are, and I think it's one of you tuned the pendulum there, but I think this adds a layer to the environment from which the thermodynamics are happening.
Complexity is not bad, if it's useful, but a lot of times people just add complexity just to add. Yeah. Well, this is a real specific thing that I never even considered before, where now I'm curious, what I'll be able to track this now, and this will give me really good information, because I'll have this data on every client before they start prep, and you start seeing that people with a really low density lipoprotein count, you'll see, do they burn fat better in prep? Because what you would kind of assume is that as these people get in fat storing mode, they get in a calorie deficit, their body's burning the fat, that count's going to drop dramatically early in the prep. But I don't know how long that'll take. Maybe it's the first month before the body really fully adjusts, and those people get a lower percentage of fat burning per gram of calorie deficit compared to someone else, and you'll be able to see this data and get some kind of predictive measures where, as we say, don't get too complicated. But I think this is useful complexity, because you can start getting like, well, when I see a number at 2,000, I've noticed that the first month of a prep was hard. If that number is over 3,000, then preps, we really have to change the way we lay out macros early in the prep. If that number is under 1,000, then you're probably going to burn fat as a really high percentage of our calorie deficit right out of the gate. That's awesome. Prep's going to go smooth.
It's super interesting.
Yeah, I kind of have a couple questions on the lipids now. So I think I had heard of the small density lipoproteins, but I think it's one of those things, like I got a couple comprehensive blood panels before, and they were on that, but I really didn't know how to interpret it. And I think most of us bodybuilders typically maybe even worry about lipids too much, or the ones that were typically shown, because usually we know that HDL is supposedly the good cholesterol. So I think most of us look at our basic lipid readout and think, okay, I want my LDL relatively low, I want my HDL relatively high, and I want my triglycerides low. And if my HDL triglyceride ratio is really good, well, then I must be good, right? But I'm starting to hear a little bit more, I don't know, I haven't heard any specific research, but I'm hearing more people say that that's really not even necessarily accurate, and just those three metrics may not have anything to do with your risk for, say, heart disease or other problems.
And I don't want to say all the things on my blood work, but there were some interesting things. Like my C-reactor protein was really low, and I would have thought, given androgen use, I would have expected that to be high, And then even some of my traditional markers were kind of like, we would expect that to be high. But then some of these, like these kind of more unique markers, and I guess like the small low density lipoprotein, it was the way, like, because they measure multiple ways. They do like a picograms per milliliter or whatever, but then they actually did a count, which I thought was like when you're analytical, that like seeing that number is, like for whatever chunk of blood they had, this is how many of those that met that criteria. But for me, like that's really like made it seem like more useful of a tool. I guess now that you said that, I probably could have linked that from that ratio before, but it's like seeing that actual number, and you can picture like there's 3,000 of them in a little, Do
you think, I don't know how many athletes really specifically lipid readouts you've seen at this point, but do you think it could be the case that somebody would have on a surface level really good lipids, like high HDL, low LDL, but then look a little more closely and it turns out they actually do have a really high count of those small low density lipoproteins?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be, it seems unlikely that you'd get like someone with really good here and really bad, like in the same, but I think you could definitely get someone who probably has good triglycerides. And then, you're probably not going to have someone with good HDL if they're in this sport, because the thing, like an androgenic blood profile just doesn't lead to it. But, like someone, especially if they're on a statin, maybe their LDL probably isn't going to be that high, but if they're really not burning those LDLs off quickly at all, and there might be not very much of it, but if they sit there forever and they're going to reach that small level and sit, there's a much higher count of that. And so you get an idea of how quickly they're using the fat. And that's because it's like going back to the complexity thing, but because you can get like your A1C, because that's linked to hemoglobin, so it's not just, I think it's the patient care provider kind of argued with me about that, because he didn't think that was as useful of a tool for insulin sensitivity as I did, because of its linkage to hemoglobin. And he gave a decent he probably, obviously he does this for a living, so he gave a great argument, better than I did. But the expert gave a decent argument to the person who doesn't know anything. But like you see that and you think, so someone could have, they got a A1C of 4.9, you think like great insulin sensitivity, but then like going back to the small low density lipoprotein count, that's high. What were some of the other, like I said, some of the things I didn't even, some of the things you're talking about, the insulin sensitivity, and I have a type 1 diabetic daughter Well, I've been going to, an endocrinologist every 3 months for 12 years now, and so you'd think like there can't be anything with insulin sensitivity that I haven't seen yet, but there were some things and some correlations that I hadn't really considered.
I'd be curious, again, just looking at different prep coaches, if there's any blood work that would bias prescription of list versus miss versus hit.
A good point. Yeah, that's actually really good. Well, it would, I think, because if your A1C is low, well, I could give a case actually. If you have someone with like liver issues, their liver enzymes are really elevated, and their A1C was low, and their fasted glucose was low, but their lipids showed that they weren't burning fat very quickly. They don't have any there's no issues with lipids. It's not like LDL is not great, but it's not elevated. HDL is not really low, but it's not above 40. So, basically someone on androgens, not a clear issue, and not a clear issue with insulin sensitivity. But if their liver enzymes are elevated, and they did like a ton of additional stuff with liver, and their their small density lipoprotein count was high, I would probably not put them on HIIT, because their liver's not going to be able to release liver glycogen at the rate we need for their insulin sensitivity, because they're clearly, when carbs enter the blood, it gets used up really, really well, and fat doesn't, and so we're gonna risk hypoglycemia every time we do HIIT, because they burn through carbs great, but they're not burning through fat. And so, which is something, because as a HIIT proponent, I would have argued against that basically for the last however many years I've been using HIIT.
One thing that I was thinking about today, just in my check-in with you and thinking about prep, is I've just been doing lists this off season, and I feel like I've maintained better conditioning this year than I have in previous years. And not that it's great, it's off season, but I just started thinking about, every prep that I've done with you, when we've kind of transitioned to more lists, it seems like there's a better response. And I don't know if it's just because I'm a little stress ball, and that is
very likely. And well, like you're lighter, and you're like the oxygen required to move your muscle mass is lower, and so like someone like Dave, like a minute of HIIT, the calorie count is just so high when and the intensity doesn't even need to be that crazy high. Like a guy like Dave can get 200 calories in 10 minutes with HIIT, like without batting an eye. So 20 minutes of HIIT, you got 400 calories. There's no way you're getting 400 calories in 20 minutes of HIIT, but for 40 minutes of list, you're probably because you can probably keep a sustainable level of low intensity lists for you is going to be much higher intensity than Dave, because you're lighter.
I'm curious because I feel like I see so many coaches who are so anti-HIIT now, and I don't know if
it's just like for a period everyone was anti-list, and my reason it was like for a period you would only do fasted. I like to look at things like the actual numbers, and I think we did this here where we talked about the blood glucose. Like you take someone with a blood glucose, most humans are around 6 liters of blood, like 5 to 6, 5.5 on average, but 6 gives easier numbers, because if someone has 6 liters of blood and their blood glucose is 6 milligrams per deciliter. So if their blood sugar is 100 milligrams per deciliter and they have 6 liters, you do the conversion, that means they have 6 grams of blood in their body, or 6 grams of sugar in their blood. But that makes it so that would be like non-fasted, means you have 6 grams of sugar in your bloodstream. Well, if you say fasted, you're at 70. If you do that same conversion, that's 4.8 grams. So it's 1.2 grams of carbs difference. So technically, yes, you burn fat faster if you're doing, fasted cardio, but it's 1.2 grams of sugar faster, which is like, 5 calories, 6 calories, which isn't,
That also means that if you're going hypo and your appetite goes to the roof and you think you need to eat the world, you can actually eat like a sleeve of Smarties and be okay. You just need to wait.
Yeah. The other thing, like with women, because like a standard step mill, like my HIIT would be like maybe like when I'm in good shape, maybe I can do level 12 on the minute hards. usually less, and my minutes easy are like level 3, where like my female clients, if I put them on lists, they'll do like level 6 or 7 or 8 the whole time,
Yeah.
And so yeah, you consider like someone like, so I'm always changing, and like for a while I was just all hit. Now I'm kind of moving back and like really kind of trying to customize it to the client, and realizing that a lot of women are like, because they can push the list harder, proportionally than the hit. And yeah,
I'm always really interested, like when you see before and afters again, like as someone who I don't get into the physiology side of what's going on with blood work and fat loss. I'm so fascinated by the different types of like phenotypes you see in responders. Because we see phenotypes like big picture when you look at someone, but I would even bet that you could have like categories of how people respond to different prep.
Yeah. Like when you learn about nutrition in school, they talk about things like your metabolic rate is not supposed to decrease with age. It really, like you lose muscle mass. That's really what it is. And your metabolism's not supposed to slow from calorie deficit. It's not supposed to change like that. And it's not supposed to increase, like you're not supposed to be able to change it. And you learn all these things, but then you work with people and you also learn like metabolisms aren't that much different. Most people have about the same metabolism. And that is probably true. Most people probably do. But you realize that the outliers are true outliers, because if you go on teamtroponin.com, Pro Card Prep, and this is a super heavyweight. You can see what this, and you guys know who that is, and it's a mass monster, and you see the amount of food he's eating. There's nothing, and then like another guy, Antonio Mitchell, Men's Physique, is a Men's Physique pro. If I showed you what he dieted on, he's dieting on like twice as many calories as this guy was eating in the off season, and Tony's shredded at like 205 year round, eating 3 high days a week with 1,000 grams of carbs. And this guy was, eating like 50 grams of protein per meal and like 50 grams of carbs on his low day in the off season at 300 pounds.
That's insane.
Yeah, who comes to mind is Connor from the gym, Hidden Gym. There's
Connor Doobie.
Your old client, Connor Doobie. I don't know what his food intake was like then, but he was talking to me about it. So his recent diets and off season, and like he's like my height, and he just stepped on stage. I think he was a light heavy. He was like 180 something, I want to say. So not a huge guy, but he's eating a ton. Like he's eating almost as much as I am.
Yeah, so much. And he's like people like him really are frustrating from a personal standpoint, because I always carried fat in my midsection, and he's always like bone dry. It's like, well, we're doing like 3 high days a week and like just crazy amounts of carbs, and he doesn't weigh that much. And even when he's watery, he's still got like cross striations on his intercostals.
Yeah.
Like I even have like.
There's some women like that too, and I'm like, what do you mean you're eating more carbs than I am when you're a bikini competitor? Yeah. Like it's not fair.
I have a client who just started prep for Masters Nationals, and she's moving from she's figure to physique, and like. Well, she's someone who you would argue you're not supposed to really improve her metabolism, but I have her diet year after year, and what we got her metabolism to this year, I don't want to say because you'll not be happy, but
I am right.
Yeah, I mean like 5 meals a day, 35 grams of protein per meal. Like her low days were like 35 grams of carbs per meal, also with 14 grams of added fat. She was eating like 100 grams of carbs post workout, 75 pre-workout with 7 grams of fat, 50 grams of carbs, and 10 grams of added fat. And other, just like a lot of,
like where I was before Universe. That was a good prep.
Yeah. And those are things too, like you said, a good prep. When you know where your metabolism at the start of a prep, and you can see like people. You can't see my client folder with all their names for all their files. I'm pointing, but it's funny opening them up and seeing how much different people's metabolism. And you can tell that people who have like a great off season and put in the work, how much higher their food is when we start the next prep versus people who have like a clusterfuck of an off season and all kinds of issues pop up and off and on with the diet, and then we start prep like 1,000 calories less a day than we did the prep before.
Oh God,
it's gonna be a rough one. I'm curious how much variance you see in people as far as like ideal fat versus carb intake. And I ask this because I know traditionally you've been pretty much on like a lower side as far as fat goes. You try to push carbs, but I know right now with myself, like I've my growth is like definitely leveled off compared to the beginning of the off season. But at the moment, my medium days even are like fairly high fat, like 14 grams of fat on the non-training meals. But then like the total days carb intake for medium days is only 600, which I don't think is crazy by any means for being
Not your
290.
size, though. Well, to clarify, because people listening, like 14 grams of fat per meal, that's not this. We're talking about only added fat, not the fat that's already in the meat or in the carbs. But yeah, and I don't plan like ahead of time. Like I let the diet go where it goes, and so my natural, like what I'm most comfortable with and what I feel most confident is if I like typically lower fat diets where I can manipulate the carbs more, and I don't vary the protein that much, and that's kind of like my sweet spot where I just like that's where I start out. But I take the diets where, like, I have one client, Jacob Apple, who's added a ton of size, and we're basically doing like much closer to a Dave Palumbo style approach. We're still cycling carbs, but his fat calories are definitely higher than his carb calories, from a percentage. And yours is, kind of adjust, like that's what I would say also with clients is like that first diet, like when you send, like when people just sell diet plans, it's like that's really like to me, it's like a scam because, like the first one is, I'm just guessing, like anyone can do that. Maybe my guess is better because I've done it a long time, but knowing how much they change. And then, so like you send that first one and you're just guessing. And so the client's always worried, like, well, this is different than I've been eating. I don't know. It's like, well, we'll learn that. And like, because the way I look at the diet, the numbers don't even mean anything because we're just like, like it's like how Arnold used to talk about like sculpting a physique. Like I need a little more here, a little more, like it's like we do the diet and now the diet is here, and if we see that we need to be fuller, we just add a little bit here in the carb section, whatever that number, the number doesn't matter. We just know that, it needs to go higher. If you start getting too watery, then we need to pull it down, and it just kind of, and you let like the diet just kind of takes you. And then like Dave was like holding a lot of water early on. And so like one of the first things you can do is adjust the carbs down a little bit, but you don't want to bring calories down. So you bring, fat's a little drier form of a calorie. And
yeah. Do you think that kind of like, I don't know, having the balance of calories a little bit more in the favor of fat leads to easier fat burning when you do transition to a prep? Or
I don't think so. I haven't seen it. And I think like, generally, I just don't like that as much because it's the stuff you can do, because like the rebound, all those like that cool stuff that happens when rebound is so closely linked to carbs. It just is. And there's still so much we don't really know about the non-myofibrillar aspect of muscle growth, and it's clear that and there's fatty acid linked to that also because there's fatty acids in the muscles, and and you obviously like. You look at like Wagyu beef, you clearly you can manipulate the amount of fat in the muscle more than carbs because there's Wagyu beef that's really like infiltrated with fat, there's no like glyco beef that's really infiltrated with glycogen, but you can't, it's much easier to manipulate with the water aspect of it because you could load a ton of fat in the muscle, but there's also going to be equally amount of fat outside of the muscle, so I like the carbs because I feel like you can do more. You have more wiggle room and you can do more cool things like really push the high day, really fill out, and like the really quick dramatic changes that you have in a physique have always been really closely linked with carb intake, at least with my clients.
Makes sense. Well, I think another thing we were going to talk about was sleep. And I know we've talked about this before in kind of a different light, basically saying sleep doesn't seem to directly affect body composition, either muscle gain or fat loss. But obviously, you're going to perform your best and feel your best if you get sleep. And this has certainly been an issue that I think at this point both of us have encountered, maybe due to slightly different reasons. But it actually took me a while to finally have sleep issues. I would have thought I would have had them closer to 250, but this off season I finally started sleeping really poorly to the point where like I could, I'll say, sleep 8 hours, and then still midday I would lean back in my chair trying to work, and I would be in REM sleep in an instant, and I would wake up 5 minutes later having dreamt a full dream. So I got an at-home sleep study done, and it turned out I do have mild apnea. It was funny what they considered mild, because I think I had like 60 events per hour, and they considered that mild. But I tried a little dental device, and I guess the long and short of that is it kind of pulls you into more of an underbite, so you're not in such a overbite mouth breather kind of position. The idea that
I just had a thought. Go ahead.
I think the idea is that it allows you to like hopefully nasal breathe a little bit better and open up the nasal passages so you're not snoring. It didn't do anything for me. I was still snoring like crazy. So
did you have one made by a dentist, or did you purchase one?
I didn't just order one of the one size fits all. I had one molded, kind of paid a good amount for it. Unfortunately, it didn't really do much for me. So then I went back to the same place that administered the sleep study, and they prescribed me a CPAP. And now I've been using that, and I still kind of take it off inadvertently in the middle of the night sometimes. But when I don't do that, it works fantastic. So yeah, I guess I just wonder what have you seen with yourself or with your clients as far as CPAP and how it relates to even physique progress or at least strength?
Well, I think you see an improvement, and you see like, and it's little things like, because the guys are dealing with it are usually the bigger guys, and like it's really like the thing that sleep will affect is the health stuff, because you start holding a lot of water, you start, you can, manage it, you can take pre-workout, you can find a way to get through it in the gym, and you can still get your meals in. But if you start like really holding water, you're going to run into health issues that are going to hold you back. And like good sleep really affects that. You'll flush water much better when you're sleeping well. I mean, it just kind of makes sense. But when you're getting restful sleep and your circulatory system is moving things well. But I think the gold standard is a CPAP or a BiPAP. It just is. That's the best. But like you said, the issue is that it's easy to not take off. And for me, my problem with the CPAP was being a mouth breather. And this was before I had nose surgery. And so I really couldn't breathe through my nose. I had to wear the full mask. And then I just never made it through a night with it. It was obviously better sleep, whatever I got, and it was, I remember like thinking it like, because when I first got a CPAP, it was just a life changer. I was like, this, I remember actually getting my sleep study when I had the CPAP, because they wake you up at like 6 a.m. or whatever, and I didn't go to sleep very well, and so I went to bed at like midnight, and I remember they wake you up at 6 a.m. and I remember thinking like, oh god, I'll make it home and then go back to sleep. And I kind of got in the car. I remember driving home thinking, I don't think I'm going to go to sleep when I get home. That was like incredible. I had slept like that I don't know when, since I was a kid. And so I remember it being a dramatic difference. For me, it was the hassle, and having to clean the thing, and then cleaning your water solution, because if you get any like bacteria growth in there, there's no like, you get a Q-tip in there, like you can't clean that, I don't know if the newer ones you can open it and take it apart, but the ones I had, they weren't. It was just like the hole. And so I was like, like trying to clean that, or like what kind of solution you put in there, and what kind of bacteria am I breathing in? Always having to worry about ordering replacement tubes or a new filter. And but then for me, it must be the way I breathe, because the dental device actually, because it kind of prevents me from mouth breathing, which is helpful, because you do get better oxygenation from the nose. And did we talk about that? Because I was used to think like that was garbage, like in the nose, out the mouth. I watched Karate Kid with my 7-year-old the other day. Not to get on a tangent, but that movie's good. That's so much better than I remember. There's a whole, there's like all the like the whole backstory you don't catch as a kid. That came out when I was like 5. It came out in '84. But how like Mr. Miyagi, Daniel asked him if he'd ever taught anyone karate, and he said no. Well, the story is one of the Miyagi's in like 1629 somehow found himself in China and then stayed there and like had a family, and they learned Te, which is like hand or fist or something, and then they brought it back to Okinawa and renamed it Karate, which is like open fist. And that was and then each Miyagi learned two things: fishing, because Okinawa is like a fishing island, and karate, and you taught it to your sons, and that's what you did. And so there wasn't like dojos; there was just you, and you taught it to your son, and then that they taught it to their sons.
Wow.
And well, do you remember this part of the story? I didn't. I remember the scene where he's like getting drunk at his house, and Daniel comes in, and Mr. Miyagi's in his army uniform, and he's all wasted. Well, when he's telling the story, was Mr. Miyagi, his wife, who was Japanese, and during World War II, he fought for the U.S., but because she was Japanese, she got moved to a relocation camp where she was pregnant. And then she was coming like to her due date, and he asked for a leave to see her during the birth, and the army didn't grant him a leave because they were doing, it says kill many Germans. So it was like maybe like D-Day or something, like that was kind of implied, like, no, you can't, it's D-Day, And so she gave birth to a son, and then they both died because the U.S. didn't supply doctors to the Japanese detainment camps. And so that's why he had never taught anyone karate, because his son died at birth with his wife.
Wow.
And then that like patch
these are layers here.
I know. I was like, man, I never caught that. I was just like, I just wax on, wax off as a kid.
I didn't know that at all.
I was like, man, so it's like deep, like, that's why he never taught anyone. And now he's teaching, Daniel, and he wasn't like, at first he was kind of hesitant, like he helped him a couple times, but he wasn't like just going to teach him karate, but yeah. And probably because he didn't want to, probably because, like Miyagi's only teach their son, and he didn't, his son died at birth with his wife and he never remarried. Yeah, and then even more like that patch that they sewed on the back of his gi. That was like I think like the last thing he had from her, because she sewed that like before he went to the war. And
wow,
yeah.
We need to watch this movie again.
Rewatch. Oh yeah, I was like, as an adult, I was like, man, I'm like, it's like my daughter's like, why are you crying, Dad? I'm like, I'm not. It's in here.
Just allergies.
Yeah. But anyways, I don't. Oh yeah. So, but I always thought that was garbage. Like it breathe in the nose, out the mouth. I was like, you can't breathe in your nose. You'll die. You'll suffocate to death. But you get like, I don't know all this. My wife always talks about it. I should listen more because it's useful now. But you get like better nitric oxide from nose breathing, and you don't get it from mouth breathing. I think there's like receptors somewhere in the nasal cavities before it reaches the trachea. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. And so like, yeah, you get better oxygenation, your blood vessels dilate better. And so, yeah, so for me, the other nice thing is it forces me to nose breathe. I think because I still catch myself mouth breathing, even though I don't need to anymore. I think because, I broke my nose when I was 12. And so from 12 to like age 40 or 39, whenever I had the surgery, I didn't breathe through my nose. I couldn't breathe at all through the left. It was completely blocked. And then the right, I couldn't breathe very well.
Well, your cervical posture is adapted to that over a couple of decades now. And so even though you've had the surgery, your neck is in a position where your cranium sits forward. So
you say that. And I wish I would have known that. Like I might have ended up being a good looking guy, because I learned all these things. Like if you nose breathe, your jaw's like more chiseled, I want to have like this big round Polish face.
I had a consult with a PT this week who's helping me with some stuff. I posted an article on Team Troponin actually where you can see my whole body is literally like side bent to the right. And one of the places I noticed it the most is my jaw. And it started developing after I started training really hard again, after training my adductor. And you see a difference in ear height. You see a difference in eye height. You see a difference in nasal deviation, chin deviation. And I asked him about that. He kept asking me like, can you nasal breathe? And I was like, yeah, I can nasal breathe. Like, that's no problem. But we started talking about the role of the neck. And I was like, weird. I've been having this weird tinnitus going on. And people will orient themselves to, and our nervous system will orient itself towards whatever frame of reference we can get. And so my body had become and still is, so right-sided that it actually created more issues over here in order to like anchor for stability. Super weird.
Yeah. Stuff like that. It's like
so wild.
Yeah. And like, I feel like Western medicine was so slow on that for so long, like Eastern medicine was, yeah. But it seems like they're finally like, like my wife's really going to focus almost, I mean, she's cut down her hours really because she's working with us more, but like to 1 day a week, and really wants to focus just on like sleep dentistry. And I don't think that field even existed 20 years ago.
There's a field, so I'm more kind of formally taught in a school of thought that goes into the human asymmetry and the fact that we're not built symmetrically. And they take this all the way up to the jaw and the kind of craniofacial system. And they tell any PT that's practicing like this, like if you don't have a dentist you can refer out to, nothing you can do is going to change whatever occlusion is going on with their bite. And so, people like Dory being able to actually understand things like that, because I would imagine that sleep dentistry has a lot to do with breath. And
yeah, I think that's probably like, yeah.
That's also where this kind of school of thought comes from, is the fact that our inherent asymmetry stems from our breath, and the fact that our diaphragm has different left and right side influences and creates these proportional patterns. So,
and I would have like poo-pooed that too, like
everyone always does it first.
Yeah, well, I want you think like once someone explains it, like if it once it's like logically laid out, then it's different. But like when someone first says like, well, your facial structure depends on how you breathe, I'd be like, bullshit. But then it does, and the foods we eat, and like eating soft foods makes you have a weaker jaw. That's why like you go to like Papua New Guinea, and these people have never seen a dentist in their life all have perfect teeth, because they eat like hard meat and they're chewing dense vegetables, and so their whole life they're chewing things. Their jaw structure grows differently all through puberty. They have room for all their teeth. They don't have the occlusions with breathing. They breathe through their nose better. Their nasal cavity adapts to that over the time, the way their palate shapes. And it's like,
it's really interesting too to look at one of the cues I've been using with some of my athletes lately that it's appropriate for. This is not for everyone, but your ability to regulate pressure very much depends on your jaw structure and your hypoglossal and like tongue muscles, basically, in where you can put your tongue in your mouth and really drive pressure there to kind of create a seal. And if you can't breathe in and create that seal that you need, honestly, that's your ability to brace. And any other output that we get is going to be very dependent on the ability to create pressure and stability within an internally driven system. So even when we're talking about jaw and breathing and things like that, it's so related to your ability to, quite frankly, brace and generate stability based on tongue posturing. So for some people, it's really important that like if like a tongue tie is a great example of, if you have a tongue tie, you're probably not going to be able to generate the same pressure seal that you need in order to promote the breath pattern that's actually going to expand a rib cage and create the buoyant effect.
It's funny because I think on like days when I haven't been nasal breathing well, or certainly when I've been a little bit sick and congested, you'll then notice, like when we go to train legs, that my bracing is off on like the hack squat, like pretty much every time.
Yeah.
That's the being congested. I don't know how I couldn't breathe through my nose, because now that's so unbearably uncomfortable now, like, and thinking that I used to, because now I'll watch even old videos, like, because before we went down to Table Talk, I think one of my kids, or no, someone, I can't remember, someone asked something and I was like, oh, no, they do really cool stuff and they'll do edits. And I showed them like a shoulder video of me training there. I was like, see how cool that, and then listening to me talk, it's like, oh God, I was annoyed with myself, like while I'm talking, and I don't know how, because now if I get a cold and I can't breathe through my nose, it ruins my whole day.
It's wild too. I'll work with people who, after they get sick, they feel like they're training, like they don't train well. They're like, well, I feel recovered. And I'm like, take a breath for me. And like, I watch them take a breath and I'm like, well, if you can't freaking feel your chest, where do you think you're going to put your air? Where you stabilize maybe your neck? Do you think you're going to get the same output there? You're going to get the same mirror reflection of the respiratory and pelvic diaphragm?
Well, there's that trend of people like the weight belts going higher. I guess you could put one right here.
There's a website for that, Justin.
I don't think we think about the cardiovascular demands of our training that much either. I mean, leg training, obviously, but outside that context, we don't think about it much. But I think even like bracing and posture aside, I think when you are either when you're congested or even when you're not congested, but you're just not breathing well, it's amazing how much your output on everything can feel limited. Certainly, you'll feel it on something like HIIT. Level 13 will go from challenging to damn near impossible. But even just moderate effort sets in the gym start to feel hard.
And that, if you don't, and if you think like that is an obvious, clear difference maker, if you can't, if your lungs, if your cardiovascular system is a failure point on your weight training, obviously your weight training isn't going to be you're not going to maximize the muscle progress.
I think one thing people can do to kind of help with this is a lot of times when they do nasal breathe, like Justin, take a breath into your nose. You can hear it, right? That probably means you're not actually getting expansion. There's some resistance still in here. And to really get good rib cage expansion, you have to be able to inhale quietly. And that's something that actually when we were in Tampa, Dave was going through some stuff with his knee, and I had him just do a really quick drill. And I was like, I realized the drill doesn't matter. I need you to breathe better. Like I need you to breathe without some tension, because when you breathe and you actually are quiet in your inhale and you create that pressure valve, you're going to feel your rib cage starts to expand a lot differently. So for a lot of people that are coaching these diaphragmatic breathing drills and full exhalation and blah, 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 that's all great. But if you can't inhale without resistance, you're not going to be able to fill your lungs and your rib cage the way that needs to be done. So one really quick thing that you can do is you're sitting here watching this, and as you're breathing, tongue on the roof of the mouth. And I'm not just like here, like that's upper on contact. And inhale as quietly as you can. Actually, anyone who, if you're really into the breathing stuff, go learn from Zach Couples. He's brilliant. He's the PT that when I've got stuff jacked up, I call Zach. Or again, I'll call Zach. But he has a cue where he'll kind of tell people like, pretend you're inhaling like you're in a horror movie and Mike Myers is coming after you and you don't want to be heard. And and I'll be honest, I think a lot of the size I put on my legs in this off season is because my bracing has been better and I've been able to get better quad output because my inhalation is better. And it's all come through actually being able to inhale quietly. So quiet inhale, and you'll feel your rib expand. Your rib
That'd be a cool article, because your legs really have improved, and so you can make if you. I
also made myself cry multiple times a week during sets, but.
But if you could break that down and here's where my training changed, not that much, but here are these other things that people might not have considered otherwise.
Yeah, and it's hard because you don't want to be that PT that's frou-frou, right? And unfortunately, I think anyone hears diaphragmatic breathing and they're already zoned out. Like if I say diaphragmatic breathing, people already have so many fixed ideas on what that looks like. So you almost have to paint it a different way, probably like you need to for contest prep or carb cycling or anything that you do. That's
if you are, I'm sure there are people listening to this even after all the explanation that still are kind of poo-pooing it, but from personal experience, getting your breathing right can kind of, even if you're lazy or you don't have time, can save you from having to do a lot of other stuff, or at least put you in a much better spot. I mean,
we've changed your shoulder rotation by 20 to 25 degrees by one crossbody cable extension, focusing on breath, filling his right chest wall. So 20 degrees of shoulder rotation.
Yeah, that's
a lot.
Going from only being able to get here to all the way there.
And if your shoulder can't rotate, your nervous system, your brain's not going to get good afferent information. Your output will be limited. If your output is limited, you are not going to put on the size you want to. So
Danny, when you see bodybuilders when they hit a double bi, do you go right to the rib cage? Are you looking for? Are you a PT or are you a fan of the sport when you're looking?
She'll look at someone's rib cage who's not a bodybuilder, who's just walking down the street. She's like, that person's rib cage.
No, I'm not that bad.
Well, since we started doing this podcast, I've never paid attention to rib cages before. Now I notice when everyone's is turned or
because anytime they do a quarter turn, what's limiting them? The rib cage. Anytime they can't extend their thoracic spine and hit their back double appropriately, the rib cage. If they can't flare their lats, what are their lats anchored onto that's too stuck? Their rib cage. Every movement that we have, I said it in one of the videos on Team Troponin, axial structure is going to dictate appendicular function. And axial generally means the spine, but I'm going to add on rib cage and pelvis as well, and even cranium, to be honest. If you can't move there, you're going to, it changes the entire surface the thing is sitting on. It's kind of like if you have a tablecloth on a table that's smooth versus a tablecloth on a table that's rounded. It's just a different shape, and it's going to change the function of what you can put on that thing. So rib cage always.
I just thought of one more thing about the, not just nasal breathing, just good breathing in general. Do you think that's kind of a good argument for being in an appropriate state of arousal before a set?
Yeah, thinking about
an inappropriate state.
Dave's always inappropriate. Okay? If one of us is inappropriate, it's me. Also, what she said. But yes, there's so different types of breathing are going to bias you towards more of a sympathetic or parasympathetic state. And if you think about a lot of like our vagal tone and our ability to kind of fine tune a lot of that, there's a lot that happens right in the collarbone area. And if you actually pull up an anatomy app, and I have a video again on Team Troponin, where I pull up the app and I look at like all these muscles that are attached to first rib, collarbone, scap. You have all these muscles in your, I made a video for this week where I was like pulling this person's like right underneath their jaw. And you look at how many muscles actually attach right in the same area that are nerves that dictate our state of arousal in terms of sympathetic, parasympathetic, or the optimal state of arousal, too high, too low. And so many of those muscles run right next to that structural kind of area. If you've ever been on a hack squat and started to get that sense where you're going to like hyperventilate or almost have a panic attack, or pendulum, like I've had pendulum sets where I peel off and I'm like, I literally am hyperventilating.
Yeah, it's hard because it's buried down.
Right. And I think that's an equipment issue too, where I think a lot of these bigger companies need to start making equipment that are made for people who are not only 300 pounds. But a lot of that can be modified by where you put your breath. So I think there's a lot to be said for your ability to stay in a set, 20 repper, and just kind of mentally keep calm as well.
Yeah. That breathing can make a big difference. And that could be the difference between stopping at 15 because you're about to have a panic attack and being able to get to 20, staying relatively calm.
I'm pretty sure, Justin, you could probably speak to this more too. I'm pretty sure there's stuff, research literature, that'll talk about how changes in blood pH are going to change brain function.
Oh yeah, yeah.
As soon as our brain function changes, our safety is always our brain's first concern. So when it starts to sense that change in blood pH, because we can't.
That's like a hard shut off. I mean, blood pH, like the acid buffer system, that's like A1 survival of everything else. Yeah, there's no no fighting through that. I mean, it's your blood pH changes and your body shuts. You're done.
People talk about this breathing stuff, and maybe it just comes from the background of like all the yoga and Pilates and all of that. So you get these bigger guys, but every big guy I've worked with, the first thing that I work on with them is what's going on with their rib cage. And my track record with big guys is pretty darn good, really good. It's hard though, because when you are that stiff and you're that immobile, trying to force breath, you're going to feel like you can't breathe.
Yeah.
So someone's going to listen to this and they're going to, try and lay down on their back and they're going to try and take a quiet breath through their nose and exhale. And they're going to feel short of breath and they're going to say, F it, I can't do it.
Panic. Yeah. That was just even when I first got the dental device, like as soon as I put it in, I know I can breathe, but as soon as the option of mouth breathing is gone or very limited, it was like panic. And it was, now it's the opposite, where now it's almost like a comfort putting in because I know I'm going to sleep better. I know I'm going to get better oxygenation. But at the very beginning, it was really like stressful because it's like someone putting a ball gag on me, basically. Go to sleep. Last time that happened, it wasn't a good night's sleep.
Oh, was that also for the website? One other kind of dovetail off of this is that I've kind of been thinking about is just more and more. I've been curious, why am I so jacked up this off season? And I think it's because I've been training my back so hard. And so when you pull up the back muscles, like if you're Googling anything, go Google like iliocostalis right now. And you're going to see it starts at the lumbar spine, runs up and attaches to the rib cage. And the more and more you train things like lats and iliocostal erectors or anything, it's going to take the rib cage and shove it forward and create a lot of compression in the back that's hard to expand into. And when you're shoved forward, and the only place you have to breathe is by taking your rib cage and flaring it out, it's really, really hard to control pressure and breath. And if you can't flex, it's really hard to rotate, which is where posing comes into play. So I think a couple of weeks ago, someone asked if they want to display their lats on stage, what would they do or where would they start? And I thought about that because my first inclination is to look at some of the rib cage mobility. And I think that in general, most bigger dudes are stuck in way too much thoracic extension. And if you can't flex your thoracic spine, you're going to have a really hard time accessing that part of the pendulum from which you can hit your lat spread,
Mm-hmm.
or either of your doubles too. I mean, if you're constantly extended, operating at end range extension, you've got nowhere else to extend from to pick your sternum up for your back double. It's a problem I have too. So I have a back double. I can't hit it just right ever.
That's what she said.
Look at you. Did you guys catch that? He did it.
All right. Well, good.
All right. Yeah.
All right, guys.
Hey guys, thanks again for tuning in. If you have questions, anything you want us to talk on, drop it below. Reminder, you can go to marekhealth.com/Troponin and you can get Justin's panels there, and you can sign up. We're doing a seminar in a couple weeks here in Dallas, Texas. You can sign up for it at eventbrite.com/Troponin.
Bright is BRITE.
Yeah, it's troponin.eventbrite.com. We'll put it down in the description.
Yeah.
We're going to be covering pretty much anything that you hear us talk about here, from contest prep, fat loss, rehab. If you are interested in hosting a seminar and having us come out, let us know. We'll be doing some more of that this year. So anything you need, comments.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Until next week.